Gunnery Sergeant William Bill Masterson, US Marine Corps, took his seat on the huge plane that would finally take him home. It had been almost 6 years since he last set foot in his home, 6 years since he had held Libby, his beautiful wife of 17 years, in his arms, and 6 years since he had seen his daughter Jenny. As the plane began to climb, he leaned back in his seat and lost himself in memories of his life. He met his wife by chance in 1997 at an event in San Diego's Balboa Park while training at nearby Camp Pendleton. They were standing in line for ice cream, and her ice cream fell to the ground after some kid on roller skates accidentally hit her. He helped her up and offered to buy her new ice cream. One look at her long red hair and soulful green eyes, and he fell in love. She accepted his proposal, and that's how their relationship began. They spent the entire day talking and telling each other their life stories. By the end of the day, Bill knew he was going to marry this woman. She was a student at San Diego State University, studying for a business degree to work for her father's company, a large investment firm with offices across the country. At the time, he was a lance corporal training to be a scout sniper. She listened intently as he told her about his father, a retired Marine who served in Vietnam, and his grandfather, a former Marine who served in World War II. His great-grandfather served as a Marine during World War I and was a veteran of the Battle of Belleau Wood, a battle where Marines earned the nickname Devil Dogs. The Mastersons, he explained, had served in the Marine Corps throughout the nation's history and fought in many significant battles. "So it's kind of in my blood," he said. "I guess you could call it our family business." They dated until he received orders to transfer to Okinawa for a year's unaccompanied service. A month before he left, they discussed marriage. He told her that he wanted to ask her father's permission to marry her, since he grew up in an old-fashioned family. Her eyes sparkled, and she smiled. They spent the weekend at her parents' house in Los Angeles. Of course, her parents insisted that they sleep in separate rooms. Her parents seemed to like Bill, who by then had already become a corporal. Her father, John Whitman, invited him into his office and offered him a drink. Bill accepted the offer and sat down as Libby's father invited him to sit. "So, young man," he said, "what are your intentions regarding my daughter?" "Well, sir, I intend to marry her, with your permission, of course," said Bill. John smiled and nodded. "You know I'm grooming her to one day take over the family business," he said. Bill nodded. "I know," Bill said. "I, too, can be said to be in the family business." "So I heard," said John. "Your family tree has its share of heroes. Are you planning on pursuing a career in the Corps?" "Yes, sir, I am," said Bill. "I know your company has offices all over the country. Libby and I discussed it, and she said she could transfer with me so we could be together. The only time we would be apart is if I was sent to Okinawa or to combat. Your daughter is an amazing woman, and I know we can handle it. Yes, she can transfer with you, at least for the first 10 to 15 years, but at some point she will have to stay here in Los Angeles. I hope she becomes CEO someday. You can." "Can you handle this?" he asked. Bill nodded. "I'm a Marine, sir," he said. "I learned to improvise, adapt, and overcome difficulties." John smiled and nodded. "When are you planning to get married?" asked John. "Libby finishes studying when I get back from Okinawa, so we thought we'd wait until then if that's okay," Bill said. "That's more than okay," John said. "This will give us time to get everything ready." He pulled out the form and handed it to Bill. "Bill, my wife Abby and I love you very much," he said. "Libby loves you too, and honestly, I've never seen her happier. You have my permission to marry her, but I would like you to look at it first and sign it." "What is this?" Bill asked. "It's called a prenuptial agreement," John said. "Libby is a wealthy woman, and this is just a way to protect her and her assets in case something goes wrong and you get divorced. It's nothing personal, I'm just looking out for my daughter. You'd be surprised how many people go after girls like this. Like her, for the sake of money." At first Bill felt offended, but upon reflection, I realized that the agreement made sense. However, he wanted to make sure it was all legal. "If you don't mind, sir, "I'd like to discuss this with our lawyers at the base first," Bill said. "I understand your position, but my father always taught me to have a lawyer check it before signing anything." John smiled and nodded. "Your father is a wise man," he said. "Let your lawyers look at this and suggest changes if necessary, and we will move on." Lawyers reviewed the agreement and said it was a standard form to protect Jenny's assets in the event of a divorce. The agreement also stated that in the event of a divorce due to adultery, the guilty party, in this case supposed to be Bill, would receive no support from the other party and would lose 70% of the marital property, house, car, joint savings, etc. D. The PMG lawyer made some changes so that the agreement applied equally to both parties to the marriage. Bill and Libby took the form and returned to her father, who carefully studied her. "Why the changes, if you don't mind?" asked John. "Well, my family has a ranch in West Texas, and some of that land is leased to oil companies," Bill said. "The lawyer thought it would balance things out when I inherited it from my parents." "I understand," John said. "Well, I can live with that." They signed the documents and life continued. That evening at family dinner, in front of Libby's parents, Bill got down on one knee and asked her to marry him, holding out a diamond ring. She accepted his offer and hugged him tightly as her parents applauded. On the eve of their departure to Okinawa, Bill and Libby lay in each other's arms. "What does Semper Fidelis mean?" she asked. "I saw it on the Marine Corps emblem, but I don't quite understand the meaning." "That's the Marine Corps motto," Bill said. "It means always faithful." He continued to tell her how important loyalty and devotion were to him, and how much it meant to know that he could trust and rely on those around him. "Without loyalty and devotion you have nothing," he said. She climbed up elbow and looked into his eyes. "I will always be faithful and devoted to you, Bill," she said. "I love you more than anything in this world." He smiled and kissed her lightly. "And I will always be faithful and devoted to you, my princess," he said. The first tour to Okinawa was difficult for Bill. He missed Libby very much and spent all his free time writing letters and sending her photographs, while other Marines were having fun with local girls. He received letters and postcards from her almost every day. Soon the year had passed, and he was on his way home. Libby's parents threw a lavish wedding and even paid for Bill's parents to fly from West Texas to Los Angeles. Bill, now a sergeant, donned his dress uniform, and several Marines he knew on Pendleton served as stewards. After the ceremony, Bill and Libby walked through a traditional Marine Corps saber arch and departed for their honeymoon to Hawaii, a gift from Libby's parents. Things were going well for the couple. Bill re-enlisted in 2000 and was later transferred to the Marine Barracks at 8th and I Streets in Washington, D.C. Their daughter Jenny was born in 2001, almost a year after their wedding. She had her mother's hair and eyes, but she inherited many of her father's features. Libby worked in her father's Washington office so they could be closer to each other. The world changed in September 2001 when a group of terrorists attacked the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. A fourth plane crashed in Pennsylvania after passengers brought the situation under control. Soon Bill had to put his sniper skills into practice, and not just on paper targets. Libby understood that this was part of being in the Corps and dealt with it as best she could. When Bill was deployed to combat, she worked in her father's Los Angeles office and took care of Libby. When he was home, she worked in the office closest to them. Their love for each other and for their daughter kept them together and made them happy. Libby was proud of Bill's service and reminded him of it at every opportunity. Bill was also proud of his wife's accomplishments over the years. Through her leadership, Whitman Holdings has expanded and taken a number of steps to create a family-friendly environment. At the end of 2008, Bill was transferred to the Marine Corps Training Center at Parris Island, South Carolina, where he spent 2 years as an instructor. Libby worked at the company's regional headquarters in nearby Savannah, Georgia, and made sure not to miss any of Bill's graduation ceremonies. She was very proud of her exemplary Marine husband and made sure everyone knew about it. At the conclusion of this tour, he was promoted to gang sergeant and transferred to Camp Pendleton. Libby took over the company's regional headquarters in San Diego, and life went on. In 2011, he was sent to Afghanistan for another year-long tour. The day he said a tearful goodbye to his wife and daughter, he didn't know he wouldn't see them again for the next 6 years. By the end of his tour in 2012, he had re-enlisted for a 6-year term and was in the field when things went south. After eliminating his target, he was preparing to return to his unit when he was suddenly surrounded by enemy fighters. He knew these guys didn't believe in holding prisoners of war, and he was worried his wife and daughter would see him beheaded on YouTube. But this did not happen. He was placed in a box and repeatedly moved from place to place. Remembering his training in SEER survival, evasion, resistance, and escape, he looked for opportunities to escape, but there were none. Bill continued to look for opportunities to escape, and finally the opportunity presented itself. He had no idea how much time had passed, but he knew it had been a long time. He listened to his captor's conversations, but was unsuccessful. His knowledge of Arabic was fragmentary, but he was able to grasp a few words and phrases. From what he understood, his life was saved because someone in the States wanted him eliminated, but not killed. He also realized from the surrounding terrain and dense vegetation that he was no longer in the Middle East. When the time came, he was able to escape from the small box in which he was kept and quietly crawled away, grabbing a rifle, some ammunition, and a knife from one of the drunken soldiers. By the time the soldiers realized he had disappeared, he was already several miles away and still moving. After several days of searching, the soldiers gave up pursuing him. Bill moved quietly through the jungle. Having no idea where he was, he followed the rising and setting of the sun, moving in an easterly direction, feeding mainly on leaves and insects, as he had been taught. Sometimes he managed to catch a small animal and arrange a meal. Many days passed without seeing or hearing another person. When he came across a road, he followed it, but kept out of sight. He kept moving, looking for any clues that could help him figure out where he was. When he stopped to eat, he took out a small photograph from his wallet, a photograph of his wife and little daughter. He kissed it, then put it back in his wallet and continued moving. Bill lost track of time and almost gave up several times as his body weakened. When this happened, he thought about Libby and Jenny and forced himself to keep going. He would find shelter when the rains began and use the pouring water to wash away some of the stench. Sometimes the terrain changed and Bill adjusted, but slowly continued to move east, avoiding contact with other people the entire time. He didn't know how much time had passed, but it finally happened. He came across a city, a fairly large, fairly modern city. He looked for clues, but couldn't see anything from where he was, so he waited until nightfall. He hoped to find the U.S. Embassy and seek asylum and a safe trip back to the States. By this time, his camouflage uniform was torn and worn, and his boots were full of holes. His beard had grown long and unkempt, and he was thin and emaciated, a mere shell of his former self. Luckily, he was able to keep his ID and dog tags. When night fell, he quietly moved into the city. He saw a sign saying he was in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. He knew there was an embassy here, so he quietly made his way through the city. And then he saw him. He almost cried when he saw the building and the American flag. He approached the front gate and was stopped by a Marine guard. He held out his ID and introduced himself to the guard, who took his card and examined it carefully. The guard picked up the phone and spoke to someone inside. Bill soon found himself surrounded by Marines in dress pants, who placed him in a wheelchair and wheeled him inside. The consular officer took Bill's information and fingerprints, and within minutes his identity was confirmed. Due to his condition, he was immediately taken to the hospital. The remains of his form were cut off. He was then cleaned, dressed in a gown, and placed in a hospital bed, where medical staff immediately began administering fluids and medications through enrollment 4 in his arm. Others took blood, and the doctor examined him carefully. "Well, Mr. Masterson," said the doctor, "looks like you got to us just in time. Another day or two, and you might not have survived. Just rest and relax. We'll get you treated as soon as possible." With these words, he left. Bill began to feel better and soon fell asleep. When he woke up, there was a clean-shaven man in a suit in the room, looking through some papers in a folder. Seeing Bill move, he turned his attention to him. "How are you feeling, gang sergeant?" asked the man. Bill nodded. "Better, thanks," Bill said weakly. "Where am I?" "You are at the Nordic Medical Center in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, gang sergeant," the man said. "I'm curious if you know what day it is today." Bill shook his head. "No idea," he said. "October 15, 2016, the man said. "You've been missing for over 4 years." "4 years?" Bill asked. "Can't be." "Oh, yes," said the man. "Curious, where have you been and how did you get here?" "Who are you?" Bill asked. The man smiled and took out his ID from his jacket. "John Smith, Intelligence Liaison," he said. "Do you have any idea where you were and who was holding you?" "No," said Bill. "Somewhere west of here. I don't know who was holding me. I was passed to different groups along the way. I heard different names. I think one of the groups was Boko Haram, but I'm not sure." "Can you describe something about the places you passed through? Vegetation, terrain, whatever," asked John. John took notes while Bill described everything he could remember. Several times John nodded as Bill described something. "How did you survive?" asked John. "Thank the Seer kids for that," Bill said. John smiled. "Definitely," he said. "Do you remember anything else? Anything unusual?" "Yes," said Bill. "I remember hearing some of my captors talk about some kind of benefactor. It was as if someone wanted me out of the way, but not killed. I never understood it." John said. "We'll have to take that into account and see what we can figure out. Look, gang sergeant, I have to go, but I want you to know that your family has been notified that you're alive, and arrangements are being made for you to return. As soon as the doctors are clear that you can travel safely, we will send you to Bethesda for rehab. The good news is that you will have more than 4 to 5 years of benefits and plenty of vacation accrued." Bill smiled. "Now rest and relax, gang sergeant. You are in good hands." Bill spent at least 3 months in the hospital before doctors agreed he was healthy and strong enough to travel. According to doctors, he contracted several illnesses during his long journey and was severely exhausted. They were particularly concerned that he might have contracted the Ebola virus, but all tests came back negative. He never heard anything from John, but he was interrogated by several intelligence officers and was visited by Marines from the embassy security team who brought him civilian clothes and a fresh uniform. By this time, he had been washed and trimmed and no longer looked like the thin, bearded savage who first approached the embassy gates. He slept most of the way to Bethesda and was overwhelmed by the number of cards, letters, and flowers in his new room. He heard from his parents, Libby and Jenny's parents, but only received the standard get-well card from his wife. At least she sent something, he thought. The next few days passed in a blur as he was shuttled from one doctor to another. Every part of his body was examined, probed, and examined. They took blood from him and tested almost all possible body fluids. He was even given a psychiatric evaluation. Medical staff put him on a special diet and included him in an intensive physical therapy program. He tried to contact Libby several times, but it always seemed like she wasn't there. He managed to talk to Jenny and his parents, but Jenny avoided talking about her mother, saying that she was always busy at work. He learned that her father had finally retired 3 years ago and Libby had been named the new CEO. It seems her new position required a lot of time with Brad Jefferson, the chairman of the board. After about 2.5 months, the day came when he was deemed ready for discharge. By this time, 5 years had passed since he was first captured and 6 years since he had seen his beloved wife and daughter. He was advised that in addition to the 150 days of accrued vacation time, he earned more than $200,000 in accrued salary. He called Jenny to tell her that he was on his way home and would see her at the airport soon. Now, back in the present, he looked out the window of the plane and wondered what awaited him. Other than a get-well card, he had heard nothing from Libby and wondered if she had found another man. The plane landed in Los Angeles, and Bill followed the crowd, exiting the plane with a small bag. After leaving the plane, he took his bag and looked around. He saw his daughter at the same time she saw him. She was so beautiful and reminded him of Libby when he first met her. Jenny's red hair fluttered as she ran towards him with open arms. "Dad!" she shouted, hugging him and kissing his face. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he hugged her tightly. "I missed you so much," she said. He looked at her. "I missed you too, Princess," he said. "Is Mommy here?" Her eyes dropped, and she shook her head. "No, Dad, she's not here," Jenny said. "She's working as always. Let's go. I'll take your things away in the car. I'll explain everything on the way." She tried to take his bag, but it was too heavy for her. A man in a black chauffeur's uniform walked up and took it from her. They loaded the things into the trunk, and Bill sat in the back seat with Jenny. "What's happening?" Bill asked. Jenny took out a small laptop and plugged in the USB drive. "Mom has changed," she said. "You know she's the CEO now, right?" Bill nodded. "So she spends a lot of time with this Broadham Jefferson." "Chairman of the board of directors, right?" Bill asked. "Yes, he is," said Jenny. "About 3 years ago, he and Mom started, well, seeing each other. At first it was just business lunches, then they started having dinner together. Now they're having a full-blown affair." "He's been with your mother for 3 years?" Bill asked. Jenny nodded. "Yes, Dad. I'm sorry. I tried to explain to Mom that this was wrong, but she didn't listen. Dad, she's changed so much. She used to be kind and funny, but now she's a real bitch," Jenny said. "She orders everyone around and treats them like dirt. She wasn't like that before. She started to change after she found out that you were captured. When your status was changed to missing in action, she went completely crazy. I'm bigger than her, I don't recognize. I told her that you were coming home, but she just didn't seem to pay attention to it. Then she started walking out. More time with this Broadham. She started bringing him home. I hated her for it." She started crying, and Bill hugged her. "I'm so sorry, Princess. I would be here if I could," he said. "I know, Dad," she said. "I did something sneaky to get back at her." "What did you do?" Bill asked. "Well, I have friends at school who said I should record them on video to show you when you get back. So I bought some things online with my mom's credit card and set up cameras in her room so that she doesn't find them. I have a lot of videos with them. I didn't watch them." She turned on the laptop and switched to the USB drive. She handed him the headphones and turned on the first video. Bill only watched for a minute or two before turning off the video. "There's a lot of that, Dad," Jenny said. "Sorry." "It's not your fault, Princess," Bill said. "You might want to listen to the videos from the last few weeks," Jenny said. "Mom and Brad have been acting very strange lately since they found out you were alive and coming back. I heard them fighting a lot, mostly because Mom stopped sleeping with him and refused to have sex. Some of the conversations don't quite make sense to me." She pulled the key out of her pocket and handed it to Bill. "What is this?" Bill asked. "This is the key to your truck, Dad," she said. "When I heard you were coming home, I took your truck out of storage and had it serviced. It's in the garage." Bill smiled. He bought a 2010 Ford F-154 X4 before his last tour and loved the truck. "I thought you might need this. Mom updated the registration and insurance on him, so it's all legal." "Thank you, Princess," he said. "You're right, I'll need this. And a place to stay, because I don't intend to stay in a house with a cheating wife." "Can I stay with you?" Jenny asked. "I hate what Mom does, and she's hardly ever home these days. She doesn't cook or do anything like she used to. She has maids and servants who do everything. She probably has a servant who does nothing but wipe her ass." Bill laughed. "Of course, you can stay with me if you want," Bill said. Jenny smiled and hugged his neck. "Thank you, Dad," she said. "But you know the judge will probably make you stay with your mom," he said. "This is what usually happens in divorce." "So you're going to divorce her?" Jenny asked. "I have no choice," he said. By then, the limousine had pulled into a fenced driveway and stopped in front of a huge house with giant columns on the front. "Oh my God," said Bill. "Do you live here?" "Yes," said Jenny. "Unfortunately, Brad said she should buy it when she became CEO. I hate this place." They entered the house, and the driver handed Bill's bag to the man who met them at the front door. "This way, sir," said the man, barely able to cope with the weight of Bill's bag. They walked up a long, curved staircase that reminded Bill of something out of the movie Gone with the Wind. Bill let the man carry the bag and followed him to the door on the second floor. "Madam said you should stop here," the man said, opening the door. Bill took the bag from the man and threw it on the bed. He looked around and thought that the sterile room looked like something from an expensive hotel. "I won't stay here long," Bill said. "Thank you," he added, dismissing the servant. He looked at Jenny. "Where is the master bedroom?" he asked. "This way," Jenny said, heading toward the double doors at the end of the long hallway. She opened the doors and led Bill inside. He looked around, noticing that there was nothing to indicate that she was married. There were a few photos of Jenny and a photo of her and Brad, but no family photos or mementos of their time together. He looked at Jenny. "Everything was put away in storage," Jenny said. "Brad said she shouldn't have anything to remind her of her life with you." He nodded and walked around the room, opening drawers and looking inside. He found a legal file in one of the drawers and pulled it out. He opened the folder and read the documents, shocked. It turned out that Brad convinced her to seek recognition of his death through the courts. Fortunately, the documents have not been submitted yet. The folder also contained a notarized copy of the prenuptial agreement he and Libby had signed so long ago. He continued examining the room and left, taking with him the unsubmitted documents. Jenny followed him as he returned to the room assigned to him by his soon-to-be ex-wife. It was bad enough that she cheated on him, but to have him declared dead. He took his bags and looked at Jenny. "Where's my truck? I need to get out of here," he said. "What's wrong, Dad?" she asked. "Did you know that your mother was going to pronounce me dead?" She shook her head. "No, Dad, I didn't know," she said. "How could she?" "I need to leave," he said. "I'm sorry, Jenny, but I can't stay here, not for a minute. I need to find a hotel room and think for a while." "Will I see you again?" she asked. "Yes, I'll let you know where I am," he said. "But I have to face your mother with this, and it won't be nice." "I understand, Dad," she said. "Before you go, I have something for you." She left the room and returned a couple of minutes later with a laptop bag, an envelope, and a smartphone. She handed him the phone. "I bought you this so we can keep in touch," she said. "It has all the latest technology, and I've already activated it for you." "Thank you, Princess. This will be very useful," he said. "Please," she said. "I already wrote down my number in it for you." She handed him the laptop. "You'll need this too. Mom doesn't know I bought it. Everything you need is in the bag." He thanked her for the laptop. She handed him the envelope. "What is this?" Bill asked. "It's an invitation to a big company event that Mom will be at tonight with Brad," she said. "She always gives me invitations to these events, but I can't be in the same room with her and Brad, so I thought it would be interesting if you would go instead of me. I heard the media will be there." He opened the envelope and noted the time 21. He smiled at the possibilities. "Thanks again," he said. "I think this will be very interesting. Now, where is my truck? I have a lot to do." "Follow me," she said. Bill took his things and followed his daughter. When they went down the stairs, the servant who carried his things stopped them. "Sir, lunch will be served in 15 minutes, he said. "Will you stay with us?" "Not no, but hell no," Bill said. The man's eyes widened as he recoiled from Bill's verbal attack. "What should I tell Madam?" asked the servant. "Tell this traitor that she can kiss my damn ass," Bill said. "And you have to use my exact words, or I'll come back and wipe the floor with your face. Understood?" Yes, sir, I'll tell you that she can, quote, kiss your damn ass," he said. Bill smiled. "Make sure you do that," Bill said as he followed his daughter out the back door and into the garage. he saw his big blue truck next to a sporty Mercedes. He wanted to decorate the Mercedes paint with his key, but decided not to. He threw his things into the back seat of the cab and turned to his daughter. "I'm sorry about everything, Dad," she said, hugging him. "Please keep me posted. I will always be here for you." "It's not your fault," he told her. "I'll call you when I'm settled somewhere. And thank you for everything. I love you, Princess." "I love you too, Daddy," she said. Bill got into the truck and started it. He smiled as the engine roared to life. He looked at his daughter. "I'll contact you, Princess," he said. She smiled and waved at him as he pulled out of the garage and headed away. He knew a motel that was renting out rooms for the week and headed there, hoping it was still in business. He worked and even had a free room. He rented a room with a kitchenette and settled in. The first thing he needed to do was make coffee. There was a coffee maker and several bags of coffee in the room, so he made some coffee and began his second task, the divorce. He opened the thick phone book and started calling. Finally, he found a lawyer who said he could meet with him that day. He made an appointment and calmed down with a cup of coffee. He took out his laptop, plugged it in, and turned it on. Jenny's email address was written down on the piece of paper, so he put it aside. After going through all the settings of the new computer, he created a mailbox and sent a message to his daughter, notifying her where he was. He inserted the USB drive Jenny had given him and looked at the long list of videos. It was very painful, but he watched the video, squandering many sex scenes that didn't interest him. He already knew that they slept together, so he didn't want to see it. He was looking for something else, clues as to why she was doing this. In one recent video that was several weeks old, Libby and Brad were arguing. Brad wanted sex, but Libby told him no, explaining that she wouldn't have sex with him while her husband was alive, and they were still married. Libby left and went into her bathroom, slamming and locking the door behind her. Brad took out his phone and called someone. Bill only heard one side of the conversation. "Mahmoud," he said, "I need you to do a favor for me. You'll get paid when the job is done. Don't give me that crap. I'm not the one who lost him. You had one job, keep Masterson out of action for 5 years. You screwed up big time. Do this, and you'll get the rest of what I owe you. No, she doesn't know anything about it. Stay away from her. You agreed. To me, gotta go. Just do it, do you hear me? Bye." He hung up as Libby came out of the bathroom. Bill stopped the video, shocked to hear. Could it be that this Brad was Jefferson, the one behind his capture? Was Libby just a pawn in some sick game? At the moment, it didn't matter whether she knew it or not. She knew his opinion about infidelity and had to pay for it. But Brad had to answer for what he did. Bill copied the video onto his laptop, then prepared to meet with the lawyer. He changed out of his uniform into the jeans and polo they gave him in Bethesda. He locked everything and headed to the lawyer's office. Sally Clemens was a hard-line lawyer who seemed to have a dislike for men. At first, Bill thought he was in the wrong office and got up to leave. Sally looked at him, surprised. "Are you leaving, Mr. Masterson?" she asked. "Listen, Miss Clemens," said Bill. "I just told you that my wife cheated on me for 3 years while I was in captivity. I went through hell to get back to the States, only to find out that she was going to declare me dead. That's all I've heard from you since then." "Since I got here," is feminist muttering. "If you are not prepared to represent me because I am a man, tell me now and I will find someone else." Her face softened a little. "I'm sorry, Mr. Dusa Masterson," she said. "I do not represent cheaters, and in my experience, many men come to me because they think I will help them get rid of their wives so they can leave with the secretary. I made a guess." "That's right, Miss Clemens. You made an assumption without even listening to me," Bill said. "I think I'll find someone else." He started to leave, but she stopped him. "Please, Mr. Masterson," she said, "let me take a look at what you have." Bill sat down again and handed her the USB drive and the folder with the marriage contract and not filed documents declaring him dead. She studied all of this before turning to him. "How much is your wife worth?" she asked. Bill shook his head. "I have no idea," he said. She's the CEO of Whitman Enterprises and has a huge house. I've been away for a few years, so I don't know how much she's worth. Maybe millions. Are you sure this isn't a ploy to get her money? Sally asked. She quickly realized it was a mistake. How dare you? Bill growled. I don't give a damn about her money and never have. We had a great marriage until that bastard showed up. I have every reason to believe he was responsible for my captivity. I just want a quick divorce based on a prenuptial agreement so I can move on with my life. I apologize again, Mr. Masterson, Sally said. You said you have a daughter. Do you want custody of her? Yes, and she wants to stay with me, Bill said. Well, she's 16, so the judge might take that into account, Sally said. In reality, however, I doubt you'll be given custody. Judges almost always give custody to the mother, and your military service means you could be sent overseas again. It's probably best if we achieve joint custody with physical custody of your wife, but with liberal visitation rights. Yeah, okay, Bill said. Sally nodded. When can you submit your documents? I can prepare the documents and submit them in 2 to 3 days, she said. We'll file on the basis of a prenuptial agreement. You know California has a no-fault divorce, so you can't file on the basis of adultery. Do you want any support from your wife? Bill shook his head. Okay, Sally said, but I'll ask her to pay the legal fees and court costs. It's okay, Bill said. He inputted a large advance and left. On the way to the motel, he noticed a bar and grill and went there. Time until evening, and he felt slightly hungry. He ordered a burger and beer. After eating, he slowly drank his beer and wondered who he should contact about Jefferson. He had no doubt that Jefferson was responsible for his capture. Looking around the bar, he noticed 2 men watching him intently. Both were dark-skinned, and one of them had unkempt, curly hair and a thick unibrow. As he raised his glass to take a sip, he heard a voice next to him. "Hello, gang sergeant," said an older man with graying hair, combed left. "How do you know I'm a gang sergeant?" Bill asked. The man shook his head and smiled. "You just look like a gang sergeant," he said. Bill smiled. "Maybe we should abolish uniforms altogether," he said. The man chuckled. Bill extended his hand. "Bill Masterson, gang sergeant, US Marine Corps." The man shook hands. "I know," he said. "Saw your photo on TV. Damn, what did you do? Walking halfway through equatorial Africa without a map, avoiding all the terrorists who were looking for you, living on pasture. Missing for almost 5 years. You must have had a great instructor, Seer." "Yes, it was," said Bill. "So, who are you, and what do you want from me? If this is a newspaper interview, forget it." The man smiled and took out his ID from his pocket. Bill saw the weapon under his jacket. "Lee Gibson, NCIS agent. Is there a place we can talk?" he asked. Bill nodded. "Yes, I have a hotel room nearby," he said. Lee stood up from his chair. "Lead the way, gang sergeant," he said. "My car is in the back," Bill said. "Follow me, and watch those 2. They've been watching me since I got here." "Actually, they've been following you for a while now," Lee said. "Act on my command if they come after us, okay?" "You're in charge here," Bill said. Lee chuckled at this. As they left the bar, 2 men stood up and followed. Lee noticed this and turned to Bill. "Can you handle the curly one?" he asked. Bill nodded. "Yes, no problem," he said. When they reached Lee's SUV, which was parked next to Bill's truck, he saw the man's reflection in the rear window. He looked and saw Gibson had the second man handcuffed and was talking to someone on the phone. A few seconds later, another black SUV pulled up and 2 men got out. One of them handcuffed Curly, while the other spoke quietly to Gibson. They put both men in the back of the SUV and drove away. Gibson looked at Bill. "Not bad for an old gang sergeant," he said. "I'll show you what it's like to be old," Bill said, smiling. Lee got into his SUV and followed Bill to the motel. Once inside, Bill made more coffee and handed Lee the cup. He winced as he took a sip. "What kind of crap is this?" Lee asked. "They say it's coffee," Bill said. "Sorry, I haven't had time to go to the grocery store yet. So, what does NCIS need from me? Do you know anyone named Brad Jefferson? Lee asked. I know who he is, Bill said, but I don't know him personally. I know he's the chairman of Whitman Enterprises and the bastard who's been sleeping with my wife for the last 3 years. I suspect he might be responsible for my captivity in Africa, but that's all. Well, you might be right, Lee said. He has been on our radar for some time, thanks to a tip from intelligence sources in Addis Ababa. We have traced several of his calls to known terrorists abroad, as well as ISIS sympathizers here in Los Angeles. We have also noticed several suspicious transactions between him and some shady companies in the Middle East. Crap, said Bill. I have a video you might be interested in. About? Lee asked. Which? That's just part of the conversation he was having with someone named Mahmoud. I didn't hear the other part of the conversation, Bill said as he booted up his laptop. When the laptop was ready, Bill opened the video he wanted and played the part where Brad talked to Mahmoud. Lee's eyes widened as he listened. Do you have any other videos? Lee asked. Yes, said Bill, but I just received them this morning and haven't had a chance to look through them yet. I don't know if there's anything in there about his conversations with Mahmoud or anyone else. No problem, Lee said, pulling out a small USB drive. Copy them onto this media and my technicians will check everything. Where was this video filmed? In my wife's bedroom, Bill said, copying the files. I understand you are going to divorce her, Lee said. Just saw the lawyer this afternoon. She's preparing documents, Bill said. I'm sorry, Gang Sergeant, Lee said. Bill shook his head. Thank you, but it's not your fault, he said. For that matter, I get the impression from listening to this that Libby, my soon-to-be ex-wife, knew nothing about it. But that doesn't justify her cheating. I'll still have to talk to her, Lee said. I see, Bill said. Still, maybe you should scare her. I don't think she fully understands the consequences of her actions. Lee smiled. That won't be a problem. How would you like to see her interrogated? He asked. Can you arrange this? Bill asked. Of course, Lee said. After all, I'm in charge here. Bill smiled. I like it, he said. You're not bad for an old NCIS agent. Lee smiled as he poured the rest of his coffee into the sink and threw away the cup. You can change your opinion unless you start buying proper coffee, Lee said jokingly. Bill laughed. Do you think it's safe for me here, or is it better to find another place to stay for a while? He asked. I think you're as safe as you can be here, Lee said. Just watch your back. I'll still put a couple of agents on you just in case. He pulled out his business card and handed it to Bill. Call me if you need anything anytime. Thank you, Bill said. He wrote down his number on a small piece of paper and handed it to Lee, who put it in his pocket. I'll get back to you, Lee said as he walked out. Bill sat with his cup of coffee and watched more of the videos Jenny gave him, his heart breaking more and more. How could she do this to him, he wondered. Between sex scenes, he heard Libby and Brad discussing him being pronounced dead and the impact it would have on Jenny. He couldn't help but notice the joyful look on Brad's face when they talked about it. However, he could not understand Libby. She seemed indifferent to everything. Finally, it's time to get ready for the evening's event. He showered, shaved, and decided to put on his class a uniform. After checking himself in the mirror, he put on his cap, tilting it slightly at an angle, took Jenny's invitation, and left the room. He parked in the parking lot of the luxury hotel where the event was taking place. He walked purposefully towards the entrance, almost at a marching pace, and took off his cap as he stepped inside. Putting his headdress under his belt, he took out the invitation and walked up to the doorman, who quickly glanced at him and invited him to enter. Bill has entered and noticed Libby with Brad. Her long red hair was cut short and dyed a dark color. She was still slim as always, but around her wrinkles appeared in the eyes and mouth. She gasped as she saw Bill approaching them. "William," she began. "Oh, so it's William now?" he asked sarcastically. She turned to Brad for support. Bill walked up to him, noticing that he was several inches taller than Libby. He walked close to him, forcing Brad to look up. Bill extended his hand. When Brad squeezed it, Bill squeezed hard, causing Brad to wince in pain. "So, you're Brad Jefferson," Bill said. "You're the bastard who's been sleeping with my wife for the last 3 years," he added loudly, causing those around him to gasp. "Do you mind if I talk to my soon-to-be ex-wife?" That's what I thought. Bill let go of Brad's hand when Libby spoke. "Bill, please come home and we can discuss this later," she said in an authoritative tone, trying to dismiss him as one of her employees. Bill turned to her, fury in his eyes. Libby had never seen him like this before. "Fuck you, bitch," he said with a wicked smile. The others heard his words and quickly moved away. "I'm not one of your fucking subordinates who can just be ordered around." She recoiled from his words. He had never spoken to her in such a tone. He took her by the elbow and led her to the side. "Bill, you're embarrassing me," she said quietly. "Please, not here." "Why not?" he asked. "Are you ashamed of your own husband?" He lifted her left hand and saw that she was not wearing a wedding ring or engagement ring. "You must be, since you can't wear the rings I gave you. That's why you had an affair with that bastard and were going to pronounce me dead?" "Yes, I know about that. Sorry, but the rumors of my death are greatly exaggerated." Libby's face turned red, and she looked down at the floor. "Do you remember what I told you about semper fidelis and the meaning of loyalty?" he asked. She nodded. "So, guess what? When you slept with him, you became a traitor to me. You became my enemy." Her eyes widened in shock. "And you know what I do to my enemies." "Bill, please think twice before you do anything. Brad is a very powerful man, and he can bury you," she said. Bill laughed in her face. "You're a stupid woman," he said. "Who do you think arranged my capture all those years ago?" Her eyes widened. He wasn't entirely sure Brad was behind his capture, but he was interested to see her reaction. "You're forgetting that I'm a United States Marine. I don't run from the sound of gunfire. I point my bayonets and run straight at him. You're dead to me, and soon you'll get papers from my lawyer." He pulled out the photograph he had carried with him across Africa and handed it to her. "That's what got me across Africa," he said. "When I was cold, wet, hungry, and sick, the thought that I had a loving wife and daughter at home made me go forward when I had no strength. Now I only have a daughter left, so one of two, it's not so bad." He took off his wedding ring and handed it to her. "What do you want me to do about it?" she asked, tears streaming down her face. "I don't really care anymore," he said. "Give it to your lover, pawn it, eat it, shove it up your ass, I don't care. We're done. When you get the papers, sign them and end this farce." She sobbed as he turned and walked away. He heard her calling him, but he ignored her and continued walking, a single tear rolling down his cheek. Angry, he went to a bar near his motel room to drown his sorrows. He ordered a glass of whiskey, drank it in one gulp, and ordered another. After a few drinks, Lee and another man sat down at the bar, taking the empty seats on either side of him. "We saw you confront your wife," Lee said. "How do you feel?" "Like crap," Bill said. Lee nodded. "I know how you feel," Lee said. "My first wife was killed, and I got divorced twice after that. It sucks, but trust me, gang sergeant, life does go on." "Yeah, whatever," Bill said quietly. "I've got some good news for you if you want to hear," Lee said. "I could use some good news," Bill said, taking a sip. "The two guys who attacked you today confessed to everything," Lee said. "They admitted that Brad gave them orders to eliminate you and that he paid for your capture. According to them, there is no one else in the States who would be involved in this. We are following other leads and plan to arrest both Brad and your wife for questioning." "Do you still have those two in custody?" Bill asked. "Oh, yes," said Lee. "I'm still going to assign a couple of agents to you, just in case. They'll take you in for questioning tomorrow. We'll probably have a few questions for you after we talk to them." "Why did he do all this?" Bill asked. "He wanted your wife. It's simple," Lee said. "Do you think she was in cahoots with him?" Bill asked. Lee shook his head. "My gut says no, but I haven't talked to her yet. I'll know for sure when I do, he said. Bill drank his glass in one gulp and ordered another glass. Lee watched him take a sip. I think you've had enough for today, he said. To hell with this, Bill said drunkenly, throwing the glass down his throat. Hitting the glass on the counter, he motioned for another one. The bartender moved away as Lee raised his hand. Time to call it a day, gang sergeant, Lee said. Give me your keys and my partner will take you back to the motel. Bill looked at Lee and debated hitting him, but the rational part of his drunken brain won out. He pulled the keys out of his pocket and gave them to Lee, who handed them to his partner. Smart move, gang sergeant, he said. I'm drunk, but I'm not stupid, said Bill. Lee's partner drove Bill back to the motel and helped him enter. I'll pick you up tomorrow afternoon, Lee said. Bill nodded, took off his uniform, and went to bed. The next day, Bill grabbed breakfast, then went to the store to get coffee, a six-pack of beer, some soda, and other small items. He received a call when he returned to the motel. Dad, are you okay? Jenny asked. Yes, Princess. Why? Bill asked. Mom was very upset when she came home last night, Jenny said. I've never seen her cry like that. Was Brad with her? Bill asked. No, he wasn't, Jenny said. What happened last night? I introduced myself to your mom's lover and talked to her, Bill said. Whatever you said, it seemed to really hurt her, Jenny said. Okay, said Bill. Maybe she'll realize what a mistake she made. Keep me posted, Dad, she said. I don't like what she did, but I don't want her to get hurt. Don't worry, Princess, Bill said, ending the call. Lee picked him up early in the day, picked him up and took him to the NCIS office, where Libby and her lover were scheduled to be interrogated. He watched from the observation room as Libby was brought in, and then sat down and given a bottle of water. She clearly wasn't happy about being kept waiting, but she couldn't help it. Finally, Lee entered the room and sat down opposite her. Why am I here? Libby asked challengingly. Lee opened the folder and placed 3 photographs in front of her. 2 of them were photographs of the men who attacked Lee and Bill, and the third was a photograph taken by Bill when he arrived at the embassy in Addis Ababa. Libby recoiled when she saw the photo. What's happened? Lee asked. You won't find your husband. Is this a photo of Bill? She asked, shocked. Lee nodded. Yes, this is what he looked like when he finally arrived at the embassy in Addis Ababa. After practically crawling across Africa, we estimate he walked about 500 miles, give or take. Based on his description, we believe he was somewhere in Ghana when he escaped from his captors, Lee said. Another day or 2, and he probably wouldn't have survived. Libby started crying. Now I need to decide whether to charge you with complicity in his kidnapping or attempted murder, Lee added, or both, and also charged with assisting known terrorists. Libby was shocked. What are you talking about? Libby asked. I didn't do anything like that. Your lover did, Lee said. He hired these 2 to kill your husband. They failed the job, obviously. They also confessed to being Brad. You were going to admit your husband was dead, weren't you? Libby nodded. Only because Brad said it was necessary because no one knew where he was for almost 5 years, Libby said. And you were going to marry Brad after your husband was declared dead? Lee asked. Yes, after he divorces his wife, Libby said, her eyes filling with tears. So, let's be clear, Lee said. You began an affair with Brad Jefferson after you became CEO and planned to marry him after your husband was declared dead and after his divorce. But we have to believe that you knew nothing about your lover paying for his capture of your husband and held him for 5 years, and you knew nothing about the fact that your lover ordered the murder of your husband. Do I understand correctly? Libby began to sob inconsolably. You have to believe me, she sobbed. I didn't know anything about Brad arranging Bill's capture, and I certainly don't know anything about ordering Bill's murder. I don't have to believe anything other than the evidence, Lee said. Your lover already confessed. Said it was your idea. Libby's head rose, her eyes flashing with anger. That's a fucking lie and you know it. I love my husband, she said. I would never do anything like that. But you cheated on him, Lee said. Yes, I slept with Brad and I regret it. But Brad said Bill was probably dead, she said. I would never have cheated on Bill if I knew he was alive. I waited and didn't hear anything from you for almost 2 years. I didn't know what to think. Lee looked at her for a few moments, his eyes narrowing. Finally, he stood up. I believe you, Mrs. Hewley Masterson, he said. So I'm not going to charge you right now. Perhaps later, after I've seen all the evidence. Your lover, however, won't be so lucky. I suggest you stay in town in case we need to talk to you again. He stood up and left the room as Libby held her head, sobbing. A minute later, Brad entered the room. He walked over to Libby and put his hand on her shoulder. She jumped out of her chair and hit him. You fucking bastard, she screamed, kicking him. You lied to me. You paid for Bill's capture and ordered his murder. All that crap you told me was just to get me into bed. I hate you and I don't want to see you again. Libby, please, Brad began. She hit him, making Bill smile. Shut up, slug, Libby said. I only hope that Bill can someday forgive me for betraying me. Lee opened the door and lifted Brad off the floor, handcuffing him. He looked at Libby and smiled, then turned off the light so she could see Bill through the one-way glass. For the second time in 2 days, Bill turned and walked away while Libby screamed after him. The next day, Libby received divorce papers at work. That afternoon, Bill received a call from Sally. Hi, Bill, she said. I wanted to let you know that Libby came to see me today. She signed the divorce papers and isn't going to contest anything. She also left something for you to pick up. It looks like a very large check. She asked me to let you know that you can see Jenny at any time. She has also resigned as CEO of Whitman Enterprises, effective immediately, and is going to sell the house. I've filed everything, so you'll be free in 6 months. Free, Bill said sadly. Yes, of course. I think I should be happy, but I'm not. Bill, I know she hurt you a lot, but I think she's more loves you, said Sally. You may still change your mind if you reconcile. She says you didn't hear her side of the whole story. Maybe you should do this for closure. I'll think about it, he said. Thanks for all your help. He ended the call and headed to a bar near the motel to drown his sorrows. After the second beer, Lee approached him. Bill bought him a beer, and they swapped army stories. I heard that your wife was served with divorce papers today, Lee said. Yes, said Bill. I think I should be happy, but I'm not. Life goes on, gang sergeant, whether you like it or not, Lee said. For what it's worth, I think Libby was just as much a victim of all of this as you. Either way, I'll know for sure when I'm done with my investigation. They drank more beers before Lee spoke again. By the way, I have orders for you, so you need to stop by the office tomorrow. You've been assigned as head of the Scout Sniper School at Camp Pendleton. You'll also need these, he said, pulling out a set of Master Sergeant patches. You've been promoted top. Bill took the stripes and looked at them. He won the battle, but in his eyes it was a Pyrrhic victory. He nodded and thanked Lee. I'll come by tomorrow morning, Lee, he said. He went into Sally's office and picked up the envelope Libby had left behind. It contained a cash receipt with more zeros than he'd ever seen and a business card. Libby thought you might need a good financial advisor to help you manage this, and I agree with her, she said. Bill nodded. Don't worry, Libby will be fine, at least financially. She still has her 30% and her trust fund. Plus, she gets a small dividend from the company since her father still owns it. Thank you, Bill said. Why are you so sad, Bill? She asked. You should celebrate. You won. But at what cost? He asked. Libby was my life. She was the one who helped me survive captivity in Africa. Everything I did was for her. Now it's all gone. Not necessarily, Bill, said Sally. You still have 6 months. If you really love her, you can fix everything. Easier said than done, Bill said. Sally shook her head. Maybe you should talk to her, she said. At least think about it. Yes, thanks, I'll think about it, he said. Back at the motel, he called Jenny. Hi, Dad, she said. How are you feeling? It could be better, he said. Do you want to go somewhere for a hamburger? Of course, she said. When? How about now? He asked. Okay, I'll wait for you, she said. Bill jumped into the truck and took Jenny away. Libby wasn't home, fortunately. He wasn't ready to face her yet. Jenny got into the truck, and they headed to the nearest In-N-Out for a burger. After receiving a burger and Coca-Cola, they went to a nearby park and sat down to eat. I'll be leaving soon for Camp Pendleton, he said. Tomorrow I'll get my orders and probably leave. I don't see any point in staying here any longer. What are you going to do there? She asked. I will be the head of the reconnaissance sniper school, he said. How much? She asked. I don't know, he said. Probably about 3 years. Are you going abroad again? She asked. He shrugged. I don't know. Not anytime soon, he said. You can come see me any time. She smiled. I'd rather you were with us all the time, she said. He nodded. Me too, princess, he said. Me too. When are you leaving? She asked. In a couple of days, he said. After the stripes are sewn onto my uniforms. I have been promoted to Master Sergeant. Congratulations, she said. Thank you, he said, smiling. You know, Camp Pendleton isn't that far away. We can meet any time you want. I like it, Dad, she said. You know, Mom loves you all more. I heard it, he said. Do you still love her? She asked. Yes, I'll probably always love her, he said. I hate what she did, and I don't know if I can trust her again. I remember you once told me that people sometimes deserve a second chance after they make a mistake, she said. Don't you think Mom deserves it too? What your mom did was too much, he said. It's going to take me a long time to get through this. I understand, Jenny said. I just don't like you and Mom being apart. Me too, Jenny, he said. After a long conversation with his daughter, he drove her home and was relieved to see that Libby all more no. He returned to the motel and called it a day. The next day he met with Lee, who presented him with his orders and promotion certificate. Congratulations, Top, Lee said, reading the certificate. I'll contact you. The investigation is nearing completion, and I'll let you know what I find. Thanks, Lee, Bill said, for all. He carried clean uniforms to sew on new stripes. He talked to the financial advisor Libby recommended and told him what he wanted to do with the money she gave him. The financial advisor looked surprised, but said that he would fulfill Bill's request. A day later, he went to Camp Pendleton and enlisted, taking on a new position as head of the Scout Sniper School. He loved his new job and loved teaching young Marines, but Libby's absence broke his heart. It felt like the biggest part of his life was missing. He usually shared all this with her, but now she wasn't there to support him. Over the next 2 months, Bill kept in touch with Jenny, calling her almost every day. She told him that Libby had received an offer on the house and was looking at an apartment in San Diego. Lee called and said Libby had been acquitted, but Brad was facing several federal charges, including collaborating with known terrorists, murder conspiracy, kidnapping, and aiding America's enemies. According to Lee, Brad was facing life in prison. Libby's father reluctantly retired and returned to serve as CEO of Whitman Enterprises. He was willing to allow Libby to return to the position in the future, but she refused. A month later, Bill received a disturbing call from Jenny. Daddy, she said, crying. Mom was taken to the hospital. What's happened? He asked. She tried to take her own life, Jenny said. Please, you must come to her. Okay, said Bill. I'm on my way. Where is she? She's at Scripps La Jolla, she said. Please hurry, Dad. Bill grabbed his cap and ran, jumped into the truck and drove to the hospital as quickly as possible. When he arrived, he found Jenny in the waiting room, crying. What's happened? He asked, hugging Jenny. I came home from school and found her in bed, she said. There was a bottle of sleeping pills and a bottle of scotch. She was holding your picture and wasn't answering. I called 911, and they came and took her here. I should have seen it coming, Dad. I'm so sorry. It's all right, Bill said. It's not your fault. They'll take good care of her. What do you mean you should have seen it coming? Dad, since you left, all she does is drink and cry. I've never seen her like this. She doesn't cook, doesn't wash, nothing, she said. She hardly eats. She seems to have lost the will to live. Can't you forgive her, Dad? She's miserable without you, and so am I. Bill hugged his daughter for a few minutes and went to the nurse's desk to see what he could. "Who are you?" asked the nurse. "I'm her husband," Bill said. "We live separately for now, but we are still married. Where is she and how is her condition?" The nurse thought about objecting, but changed her mind when she saw the look on Bill's face. She pulled up Libby's information on the computer. "We've just finished with her and are sending her to the room," the nurse said. "The doctor will be out soon." "Thanks," Bill said, turning back to Jenny. Soon the doctor left the emergency room and walked towards Bill and Jenny. He extended his hand to Bill. "I'm Dr. Smith," he said. "Are you Elizabeth Masterson's husband?" Bill nodded. "Yes, I am," said Bill. "Well, we have successfully removed most of the sleeping pills from your wife's stomach, and she is out of danger for now. We will keep her under observation and conduct an examination," he said. "As soon as we see good results from her tests, we will release her. But I highly recommend counseling for her." "I would like to see her, if possible," said Bill. The doctor nodded. "Okay," he said, giving him the number of her chambers. "She'll be a little lethargic for a while." Bill and Jenny went to her room. Bill gasped when he saw her. She was thin and pale, with sunken eyes. His heart broke looking at her. He knelt down next to her bed and took her hand. He was surprised to see her wearing her rings. Closing his eyes, he cried bitter tears and prayed for her recovery. Jenny hugged him and cried too. "Why, Libby," he whispered. "Why did you do this? Please," he begged, "don't die. I don't want to lose you like this." A couple of hours later, he felt her move and heard her try to speak. "Bill," she asked weakly, "is this really you?" He looked into her face and saw tears running down her cheek. He kissed her face and hugged her tightly. "Yes, Libby, it's me," he said. "I'm really here." She sobbed, hugging him. Jenny quietly left the room as they reunited. "I'm so sorry, Bill," she said. "I didn't have a chance to explain. Can you ever forgive me?" Bill kissed her and put his finger to her lips. "We'll talk later, Libby," he said quietly. "Just get better for me, okay? Please?" She nodded. "Okay, Bill," she said. "Just stay here with me, please." "I'll stay," he said, hugging her frail body. "I won't go anywhere, I promise." He stayed with Libby all day and most of the night until Jenny came to relieve him. "I thought you might want to take a break, maybe take a shower or something more," she said. "How is she?" "Thanks, that would be great," Bill said. "She's getting better. I think she'll be fine, but yeah, a shower would be nice." "She won't be okay until you two are together," Jenny said. "She's been going down ever since. Well, you know." "Yes, I know," said Bill. He sat down next to Libby and took her hand. "I'll go take a shower and change, but I'll be back," he said. She squeezed his hand tighter. "It's okay, I promise I'll be back." He returned to his room at the base, showered and changed. He called his boss at the school to tell him what was going on. "Top, we have everything under control, so you take care of your wife," his commander said. "You have a lot of free time, so I don't want to see you at school until she's home and you two are back together, okay?" "Yes, sir," said Bill. He left with a change of clothes and toiletries and returned to the hospital. Libby's eyes lit up as he entered the room. "You're back," she exclaimed. "I told you I'd be back," he said. They spent the next day talking about what had happened while he was in captivity. "That NCIS agent said you walked about 500 miles across Africa," she said. "It must have been hell." "Yes, it was," he said. "I still have nightmares about it." She started crying. "I'm so sorry, Bill," she said. "I had no idea what Brad did. Your captivity. Why did he do this? And why did you agree to recognize me as dead?" Bill asked. "He wanted to divorce his wife," Libby said. He persuaded my father to retire early and then got the board's approval for my appointment. After I received the news of your captivity, the council approved my appointment. Then Brad started patronizing me, taking me to dinners, things like that. I knew that he wanted me in bed, but I refused his advances. He backed down a bit, but continued to insist, saying that terrorists almost never keep prisoners. I rejected his advances, but allowed him to take me to dinners. I missed you, but it was nice that someone was taking care of me. I didn't hear anything from the military for almost 2 years, and finally one evening he broke me and got me drunk. That's when everything happened for the first time. After you'd been gone for almost 4 years, he suggested that you be declared dead. He thought that when you were gone, I would get your insurance and he could use the money to divorce his wife. Oh my God, said Bill. It would have been about $400,000, so he was going to use that for the divorce? Libby nodded. He said his wife would clear him out completely in the divorce, and he would need that money to tide him over until we got married, Libby said. And you were going to give him this money? Asked Bill. I wasn't thinking clearly, Libby said. I had more than enough for myself, and I considered your insurance money as blood money. I wouldn't feel comfortable receiving it. I also thought about using it to pay for Jenny's college and told him so, but he didn't like it. Have you stopped sleeping with him? Bill asked. Yes, Libby said. I stopped as soon as I heard you were alive. I told him that as long as you were alive and we were married, I wouldn't sleep with him. He didn't like that at all. I think that's when he decided to kill you. You have to understand, Bill, I thought you were dead, and no one told me otherwise. It's been so long, and everyone said there was virtually no chance of your survival. Bill nodded. I understand, he said. But why the cold shoulder when I returned? And why did you put me in a separate room when I returned home? I was in shock, Libby said. Part of me didn't believe you were really alive. I needed to see you and talk to you before I could accept it. And then there was Brad. Please, Bill, you have no idea how much pressure he put me under. And when I saw you that night, I knew it was true. She began to sob before continuing. The look on your face when you first ran into me, I've never seen you like that before. And the tone in which you spoke to me scared me, she said. I realized then that I made a huge mistake. I don't want to see that look anymore. You didn't let me explain anything. You were already ready and decisive. I realized that it was all over. So that's why you didn't fight the divorce, Bill said. Libby nodded. I knew it was hopeless. You had a prenuptial agreement. You had all the evidence, she said. Even though I was deceived by that bastard Brad, I was wrong. So I took a page from your book and retreated. What is it called? A tactical retreat? You won and I lost. We both lost, Libby, Bill said. But you still have your Marine Corps career, she said. Yeah, but it doesn't mean anything without you around to share it, he said. Libby started crying again. Her body shook from sobbing. He hugged her tightly. I'm so sorry, she sobbed. I missed you so much. Please, Bill, tell me you'll forgive me. Tears streamed down his face as he thought about everything she said. I forgive you, Libby, he said through tears. Libby sobbed even harder, hugging him tightly. They continued talking throughout the day, reminiscing about their lives. Finally, the doctor came into the room to tell Libby that her tests were good and she could be discharged. Bill called Jenny to tell her not to come to the hospital. Thank you, Dad, she said. I'll have dinner ready for you when you come. Home, Bill thought. What a concept. Hospital staff led Libby to the patient drop-off area where Bill was waiting in his truck. He helped her into the truck and fastened her seat belt, then drove her to her apartment. He helped her to the elevator and walked her to the apartment door. He was shocked when he walked inside. The apartment looked much like it used to when they were together, with family photos and memorabilia from his military career. I hope you like it, Libby said. I wanted to be surrounded by happy memories. I definitely like it, he said. Jenny came out of the kitchen, taking off her apron. Dinner is served, she said, imitating one of the servants at her mother's Los Angeles mansion. They walked into the dining room and were surprised to see the table set for two, with candles lit, wine chilled, and a dish covered. Jenny sat them down and opened the main course to reveal a huge lasagna. She served them food and poured them a glass of wine. "Where is your plate, princess?" Bill asked. Jenny smiled. "This is your dinner," she said. "I'm going out for a burger with my friends. See you later." She kissed them on the cheeks and left. "Be good," she said with a smile before leaving. "Well, our daughter has really grown up," Bill said. "Yes, I have," Libby replied. She raised her glass and proposed a toast. "For us," she said. Bill smiled and joined in her toast. "For us," he said. They ate Jenny's lasagna, then cleared the table. Libby turned to Bill. "Would you like to stay for dessert?" she asked with a smile. "Dessert sounds great," he said. "What did you mean?" She took his hand and led him down the hallway to the bedroom. "This," she said, kissing him. She broke the kiss and walked over to the chest of drawers. Opening the jewelry box, she took out something and handed it to him. "I think it's yours," she said. She took his left hand and placed his wedding ring on his finger. Then she kissed him again. "Till death do us part," she said. He smiled and watched her undress. They made love. He looked at his watch and started to get up, but Libby pulled him back to bed. "Please, Bill," she begged. "Don't go. Stay here with me." "Yes, but," he began. She put her finger to his lips. "For starters, you're on vacation," she said. "You can always call and say you've been captured by a wild woman who refuses to let you go." "It sounds crazy enough to work," Bill said, smiling. Libby hugged him. "I'm serious," she said. "We have 6 years to catch up on." "So we'll reconcile?" he asked. Tears began to form in her eyes when she kissed him. "Yes, if you want," she said. Bill smiled and nodded. "I want to," he said. "I'll call Sally first thing and tell her to apply. I have an idea." "Which?" she asked. "What if we repeated our wedding vows?" he asked. "You mean, let's get married again?" she asked. He nodded. "Yes," he said. "In church, just like the first time. What do you say? Will you marry me again?" Libby thought for a moment, then smiled. "Yes, Bill Masterton. I'll marry you again," she said. "Yes," came from the door. They turned, surprised to see Jenny jumping for joy, clapping her hands. Luckily, they were still under the covers when Jenny ran up and hugged them both. "Can I be your bridesmaid?" she asked Libby. "Please?" "Of course," Libby said, causing another round of cheers. A month later, Bill and Libby renewed their wedding vows. Bill's parents flew in from Texas, and Libby's parents came from Los Angeles. As part of the ceremony, Bill took out the divorce papers he had received from Sally and, with great emotion, tore them in two, then tore the remaining pieces again and threw them into the air, drawing applause from everyone in the church. During the reception, Libby leaned towards Bill. "Where do you want to go on our second honeymoon?" she asked. Bill got the tickets. "I was thinking we could go on a cruise, like to Europe," he said. Libby looked shocked. "These are first-class tickets," she said. "How did you arrange this?" Bill smiled, pulled out an envelope, and handed it to her. She looked at him, puzzled. "William and Elizabeth Masterson Reconciliation Fund," she read. "What is this?" he smiled. "That's what I did with the check you gave Sally for me," he said. She looked puzzled. "You mean?" she began. "Yes," he said. "I never wanted your money. All I ever wanted was that cute red-haired girl I fell in love with in Balboa Park all those years ago." She smiled and hugged him tightly. "Well, I'm glad you put them to good use," she said. They returned from the cruise tired, but happy and even more in love with each other. A few days later, Bill returned home from work to find Libby waiting for him. "We need to talk," she said. "Oh no," Bill thought. "This is not good." "What's happened?" he asked, sitting down in his chair. She sat on his lap and hugged him. "I'm pregnant, Master Sergeant Masterson," she said. "And it's all your fault," she added with a smile. Bill's face lit up with joy, and he hugged and kissed his wife. 9 months later, she gave birth to a 9-pound boy, named Jonathan Travis Masterson, after their fathers. Jenny was thrilled to finally be a big sister. Is he interested in family business? Bill asked. God, I hope not, Libby replied with a smile. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.